It feels very professional, doesn't it?
Too professional.
Downhilling has been an important part of mountain biking since it first started. In fact, it's the original bit of mountain biking. So with the rise of Enduro, we're starting to wonder, does downhill still have its place at the top of the sport? Is it still as important when it comes to developing bikes and technology? Or will Enduro bikes and Enduro riders supplant that? We spoke to a lot of industry people and we've had a good argument amongst ourselves, and this is what we found out. So Rob can probably tell us a little bit more about the sort of technology that's come from downhill and how it's made its way onto the bikes that you and I ride.
One of the main things is just how advanced the suspension dampers are. Obviously in downhill, the loads on the bikes, the bumps that they're experiencing and how rough the terrain is on the downhill tracks, it's as bad as it's going to get. So obviously anything they can do to make the rider more comfortable and let them ride faster, they were going to do, and so we saw a huge change in how the suspension worked throughout the late sort of 90s especially and into the early 2000s, and that's why we're seeing suspension forks with the likes of high and low speed compression adjustment. That has obviously then made its way onto the bikes that many of us are riding on a day-to-day basis at trail centres and doing the odd uplift day on, and it's what most of the riders are using on the EWS circuit and things like that. Then you've also got things like 4-pot brake calipers, which we saw probably towards the end of the early 90s, I think it was. And
I'd say downhill's definitely been a driver in sort of, especially like the power of brakes and how well they deal with heat, or like those late 1990s brakes, you could boil them on a pretty short descent.
And you think about rotor sizes creeping up and up and up. It's good to have the option now on trail bikes that you can use those should you go abroad, and if you want to go and ride on some proper mountains, you've got the option of using them.
We've seen a lot of air shocks on trail bikes, but when was the first air shock on a downhill bike? It wasn't actually led by downhill.
No. So traditionally, downhill have always used coil sprung forks and shocks. Obviously, we're seeing more air shocks come in.
From a testing point of view, a lot of suspension companies, you spoke to Mark Fitzsimmons from Fox Racing Shocks, and he pointed out that they actually prefer to do their testing with downhillers because it's very repeatable. Enduro stage is not quite as easy. We also spoke to Trek and asked them, how do your downhill bikes actually influence the trail bikes that you make? And they actually had a really interesting example, which is that when they want to build a long travel 29er, they didn't just go, oh, we'll build a long travel 29er trail bike. They went, let's try and build a 29er downhill bike. And then by doing that, they found out all the problems about sort of packing in so much travel, the handling issues, all those sorts of things. And then what they did is they just sort of scaled it down until they arrived at, well, this is the long travel 29er that we can do.
Because arguably it's probably one of the hardest bikes to get right, I'd say. Long travel 29er, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, definitely. It turns out that in reality, it's not quite as simple as you make a downhill bike, technology trickles down from that, and then it arrives on your trail bike. People build lots of bikes for lots of different things, and it ends up sort of filtering down. So you'll find, details that come from a downhill bike on your trail bike, details from a trail bike on a downhill bike.
Well, and interestingly, Trek were also, I think they said in that same interview that they were talking about how they were using a lot of the cross-country stuff that they were finding out around pedal efficiency and stuff like that, and filtering that into their trail bikes. And then obviously, because the trail bikes have high demands on the suspension, using that from the downhill.
The value of downhill is not just sort of like the technology there, it's incredible sort of marketing as well. And Trek said, yeah, it costs us a lot of money to develop their session downhill bike for the amount that they sell. It costs them a lot more money to do that than it does to, say, develop a Remedy or a Slash. They still think it's worthwhile simply because downhill is such a big spectacle and it's such good marketing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Syndicate is a perfect example of that. Realistically, Santa Cruz, name me one decent enduro rider they have. Obviously, they have lots of B teams, but they don't have a large factory presence on the EWS. How come when you go to a trail centre, they're just covered in Santa Cruz bikes? It's the power of the downhill riders on those trail bikes and marketing videos and other material that is pushing that brand into that area, and people just get stoked on downhill.
The video they did for the Bronson with Josh and the rest of the team on it, it absolutely made a huge difference, the amount of sales and just the buzz around that. And again, that's a downhiller on a trail bike.
Totally.
But I think as another example, you go to Fort William to the race for the World Cup, and generally speaking, most of the people there, the 20 or so thousand spectators, most of them aren't hardcore downhill fans or downhill racers. Those guys are at home watching it on Red Bull because they're saving the money for bikes and racing. Downhill is the sort of the discipline people can watch, can gravitate to, and can relate to, because it is still a guy on a bike on the trail going really fast.
And that kind of comes down to a point that Jason Chamberlain made from Specialized, where he was sort of saying about how regardless of them never riding like Aaron Gwyn, they'll aspire to it, but what they'll end up doing is buying a stump jumper rather than a demo, because that'll be a bike that they ride all the time.
Got a really good example. So a certain apparel brand that we're all very aware of that have been very focused in downhill for years released a Trail Civic helmet recently. You mentioned what it is, but that has doubled the sales of that brand, because for the first time, everyone's aspirational towards a certain brand. There's no product for them straight away. Oh, I can buy that. That relates to the kind of riding I do. Boom, sales flew off, and it's that whole branding from downhill that's just people aspire to, but no one wants a full face helmet and race pajamas. They want shorts, short sleeve jersey, and a trail lid.
I spoke to Mark from Fox again, and he had another interesting anecdote. He was saying that he was speaking to someone that worked as a product manager over in Asia, and obviously most of the bikes they sell over there are 100mm 29ers. But the product manager said to you, it's really, really important that if you want to make sales of your product in this market, that you only ever use your top downhill athletes to promote it and to push it. You may never ride a downhill bike, you may never ride on a downhill track, but seeing someone ride absolutely flat out, absolutely pinned, that'll inspire people to go, yeah, mountain biking's cool, I want to ride that. Winning downhill races does sell stump jumpers. Yeah, there is a correlation.
And View figured it up on Red Bull.
I think around 23% increase over last year. Essentially, Enduro, it's fun to do, it's related to sort of like the kind of stuff that we normally ride, but to put it up on telly or to share it on the internet as a spectacle is actually really, really hard. It's spread out, you can't get a lot of cameras in there.
Long days.
But do you not think that Enduro is still such a new sport that the media perhaps haven't figured out how to broadcast it and show people?
I think trying to do that over like 4 or 5 stages that are quite spread out, again, it's really hard to put that on all the infrastructure you need. And even if you're just a spectator, you go to a downhill race, you can wander up and down the hill.
You can get a start sheet and you know who's coming down at what time. I mean, obviously you could do that in EWS, but you might have to trek 20 miles across the other side of the mountain to go and see that rider, then come back, then go disappear to a different stage.
And there's a huge social aspect to downhill racing at an amateur level, which is why I like doing it. It's just out with your mates, riding down a hill. All you need is a half decent bike and you get your head screwed on, and it's just a good fun weekend. Whereas the Enduro, you've got to be fit.
No, I beg to differ on that. You go and do like a mini Enduro with just 3 stages.
If the trails are worthwhile,
yeah.
Not at a trail
but I mean,
centre.
if they're good trails.
I think the other interesting one is like at the grassroots, sort of downhill still buzzing as well, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I went to Pier Cycles in Ludlow, which is a really well-known grassroots racing series. And this is quite interesting. The entries opened at 9 AM in the shop for people who are keen to get on, 10 AM for online and phone. I got at 9:20, it was nearly all sold out.
Same with the BDS as well. Yeah. So yeah, that's the National British Downhill Championship. And at the time of us doing this, I've had a look at, the Britain's kind of national Gravity Enduro series. I don't think they've sold out a single round. There's a lot of smaller like grassroots enduro races, which probably explains that people don't want to sign up for that particular series. So downhilling is still massively, massively healthy as the spectacle. Definitely. And it's really healthy at the grassroots. And enduro, possibly, arguably more fun for likes of you and I to do. Yeah, totally. It's more related to the bikes that we're riding. But is it ever going to replace downhill as sort of like the spectacle and sort of like just an incredibly tough and challenging place to develop bikes?
I think there's equal places for these, for both events or both types of riding.
I'd almost say that enduro is complementing downhill and vice versa. Yeah. Cross-pollination of athletes, cross-pollination of technology, but also the uplift scene in the UK is thriving because everyone's going, well, I've got a 150, 160mm bike, I can ride this on downhill tracks now. Yes, you can.
This year they're actually looking to work it so you can actually do World Cup downhill race.
Yeah, nothing clashes, does it?
And EWS, they've actually planned it so they don't clash. It kind of makes sense that if you've got top level athletes, you want to see them on a trail bike, then you also want to see them on a downhill bike.
But it's even what's more interesting is that some of the more hardcore downhill guys who perhaps would have sniffed their nose at enduro now really looking at enduro. I mean, we were with Sam Hill last year and he was, much to Nigel's frustration at the time, he was saying, I'm going to race EWS, I'm going to race EWS, and he has, and he won a stage in New Zealand.
I remember at the first round of the EWS in Punta Ala when it first kicked off, there were some downhill riders there that were sort of referring to EWS as gnarly XC, so gnarly cross country.
Were they syndicated riders?
Couldn't possibly say. A few of those guys entered, and one of them, who's very, very, very handy downhill rider, who's overtaken on a stage by another of the Enduro riders. And I don't think they talked too much about being gnarly cross country after that.
Not at all.
So yeah, downhill is not dead. Enduro's not dead.
Nothing's dead.
Nothing's dead. It's all going very well, thank you.
Yeah.